Conference on Art and Design Education in India, 150 Years of Evolution, Legacy and Impact. Today's plenary session, day 2, delves into a crucial theme: new institutes and the University Department of Fine Arts and Visual Arts, thus shifting paradigm. This session brings together practitioners and educators who will reflect on how contemporary institutions are redefining the pedagogy of art and design education in India.
Indeed, today's discussion will focus on how the traditional structures of art education have evolved into dynamic university models, integrating interdisciplinary practices, studio-based learning, and conceptual approaches. It is privileged to have stall.
Request representatives of Confad 2025, Dr. Bhumik and Dr. Nandini Ghosh to kindly come forward on stage for the felicitation of our esteemed guest and panelists for this session, Mr. Shanchan Ghosh and Mr. Indra Promit Rai. A huge round of applause for our guests today. First, we'd request Nandini ma'am to felicitate Shanchan sir. On camera, ma'am.
Next, we would request Shoma Bhomik, Dr. Shoma Bhomik, to felicitate Indra Promit, please.
Start.
Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. I request you please take your seats. So let's give them a huge round of applause as we honor their gracious presence here at Confad 2025.
As you know, Mr. Atul Bhalla, one of our respected panelists, could not be physically present with us today. However, he has sent his heartfelt blessings for Confad 2025. So give a huge round of applause for Atul Bhalla, sir.
Our first speaker for this session is Mr. Shanchan Ghosh. Sir, can you take the seat on the stage? Mr. Shanchan Ghosh is an associate professor at the Department of Painting, Kalabhavana, Vishwabharati Shantiniketan. With a degree of MFA and BFA from Kalabhavana, he received National Scholarship in 1995, Junior Fellowship in 1998, and Charles Wallace Fellowship in 2004. Over the years, Mr. Ghosh has been interested in site-specific art and has explored pedagogy as tool for direct engagement with both public and private institutions and sites. With his early inspirations from community ritual events in Shantiniketan and his workshop experience with third theatre exponent Badul Shorkar, he explores process-based art activity where he tries to engage in specific community situations through workshops and interactive participatory activities. In recent times, he has generated a pedagogical encounter where research is transformed into a multi-sensory interdisciplinary encounter of different forms of practices. Some of his recent engagements and site-specific projects include Anatomy of a Landscape in Bengal Biennale 2024. Okay, I don't know Shanchan, if you can help us how to pronounce this. At Goethe Institute, Kolkata, the Circle Walk in Athens and Kassel, Germany, 2017. Incomplete Circles, Invisible Voices in Kochi Biennale, 2012-13. Akilarsi in Shantiniketan 2014, supported by Khoj. New Delhi, Mukhomukhi in collaboration with Sahitika and Harakumar Gupta, supported by IFA Bangalore. Mr. Ghosh worked as the artistic director of a site-based installation project on the 100-year celebration of Jallianwala Bagh massacre in collaboration with Ms. Shormishta Dattagupta, Victoria Memorial Hall, Kolkata, supported by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. In 2023, he presented a paper on Shantiniketan, past, present art practice in Bauhaus Museum, Weimar, as a part of the 100-year celebration of Bauhaus exhibition in Kolkata. He also conducted workshop with the students of Department of Public Art and New Art Strategies and Media Arts and Architecture at Bauhaus University. With a huge round of applause, we'll welcome him and we'll look forward to your speech. Over to you, Shanchan.
Thank you very much, Department of Fine Arts and Design, Sister Nivedita University, for giving me this opportunity to come and be with you today. And I really feel privileged in front of all the important dignitaries who are here and the experts in the field of both fine art and design. And it's really an honor to be with you and present something in front of you. And as today's session refers to this idea of the new and the shifting paradigms, I was just thinking how to initiate the notion of the new in a certain way, because even new has a certain historicity and historical context in which we have to see the idea of the new, how it has evolved through the last, 1,000 years, maybe. I think the idea of new is evolving constantly. There are different kinds of strategies, different kinds of references, but it's not a paper presentation. It's more certain ideas that I would like to elaborate and try to explore today. So even that encounter will be something that I will rediscover in the process where we are heading in the present context of art education, pedagogy, and practice. Mostly from the institutional point of view, I would like to present it, because being a practitioner working within the institutional space, I discovered myself in a different way, my role as a practitioner. And I do not really see the divide between a practice and education. I find a certain kind of core concern that goes into individual exploration and how the notion of education or knowledge production has evolved in the history of representation, human representation, and its relationship with its environment. And so, to begin with, I thought that I will start with a small excerpt of a movie, and which is a very iconic film, a documentary film called The Man with the Movie Camera. It was a film which was done in 1929 by Ziga Vertov. He's a Russian filmmaker, and he was just moving the camera and trying to find the city, Moscow, where he's residing. But I would like to show it because I would like to take it into a kind of a performative encounter of, when we talk about new, it's always about certain kind of exploring something that is unknown, or something as an encounter with the other, something that is beyond yourself and you are encountering. And this notion of encounter has been constantly contested in different forms. It has evolved into systems of power, It has also evolved into systems of control. And the whole idea of new has been contested in contemporary times, that whether it is somewhere outside or it is inside, where from the point of view of your operation and how you are framing the tools of practice, whether it is coming from inside or is it always an encounter with the outside. So just on a lighter note, I would like to start with this film, and then we will try to unfold things. It might be a little contradictory, or maybe an encounter would create a discourse around what is, whether it is something new that is happening, or is it a clash of cultures, or is it a conflict or a confusion that is being generated. So let's just first see this clip, the early version of the movie. This movie was shot in 29 and in 21 as a movie without sound. So the whole film was basically about bringing fragments of reality that is happening around and joining them together into a certain rhythm or a structure to unfold a certain cityscape. Then a soundscape was added to the music, to the film. So a group of musicians, they saw the film and composed the music. So that became another narrative of the film. It's not the film, the sound of the movie, it is added. So we'll just see a little bit of that and then move into the next session. Shall we click? Okay, the film starts in a long version. I will just take you through a very specific moment. Can you have the volume a little higher up? Audio. So I will just take you through the early part, which is a preparatory segment where something is about to start, something is about to emerge in the as a scene or a situation. It's more descriptive, but the thing I will just take you up that the audience is coming into the stage. And it starts with the first episode where So the first part of the film deals with this notion of the beginning of a day and a new day, a new born babies, new city, new space is emerging in front of us. And the sunlight is becoming, revealing us the truth around us slowly, and camera is observing. Okay. So I would like to replay the same part of the clip without the sound. So this was the original film that was made as a kind of a cinematic construction, only with fragments of shots taken from different parts and creating a narrative out of it. Okay. So now I would like to play the same clip with a certain different soundtrack, a song which was composed by Tagore on the idea of the new. And look at the same film, which is talking about the morning, a beginning of a new day, and see where we stand. as an encounter of two artistic compositions done in two different timelines, done maybe almost in the same time in the early 20th century, and see it where it takes us as an encounter.
নব তেজা নব বিকিরণে শুভ্র সুন্দর প্রীতি উজ্জ্বলনের জীবনে নব তেজা নব বিকিরণে শুভ্র সুন্দর প্রীতি উজ্জ্বলনের জীবনে নব তেজাগ আজি উৎসারিত নব জীবন নির্জন উচ্ছ্বাসিত সঙ্গীতে উৎসারিত নব জীবন নির্জন উচ্ছ্বাসিত সঙ্গীতে অমৃত পুষ্প আজিয়ে শান্তি পবনে নব জাগো আজি নবর বিকিরণে শুভ্র সুন্দর প্রীতি উজ্জ্বল জীবনে নব জাগো আজি উৎসারিত জীবন নির্জন উচ্ছ্বাসিত সঙ্গীতে উৎসারিত জীবন নির্জন
Okay, enough of it. I mean, no, the reason why I sort of try to bring these two very different contexts together, that not always encounters can become, can become a new relationship, but necessarily not projecting a condition for a newness always. But there are moments of settling in, there are moments of being together, coexisting, but there are also confrontations and conflicts of contexts, background, culture, from where it is coming and how it is moving. So the notion of the new is always something that has provoked human civilization to go beyond its everyday practice. But also, again, I was thinking of this story by Peter Bixel, where there is this idea of who is the best traveler, or who has traveled the world the most. And there is a competition happening, and where the person who, there were a lot of interviewees who came and shared their ideas of traveling the world, going to different parts of the world and seeing new things. And one person came and he said that, no, I was sitting every day, I was going to one place and sitting in that particular place, and I see every day a new situation and a new relationship. So the idea of the new may not always be about something that has to come from an outside context. It can also become an encounter with what are the different systems of operations in which you are functioning. So the notion of the new has evolved from its colonial framework of discovering the other and the unknown into a semiotic encounter of multiple systems of language and experiences. Modernism being one of its very kind of benchmark methods or systems of representation that intervened in the definition of truth based on optical experience and representation of illusion. So the pursuit of truth and exploring the new got associated with the practice of breaking away from tradition. And we find that wars of isms that happened in Europe, trying to project a new language of representation and definition of truth and reality in Europe. So it's an attempt to find new forms of realism, breaking away from the academic realism that we often see in the neoclassical movements in Europe, how it has established a certain norm of or defined construction of what is real or how to represent the real. And this has also led to very specific institutions based on confirming this idea of academic realism. But the notion of academics is also something that needs to be also understood in a historical context, that something that is, in every system of operation, there is a notion of academism, that you develop a certain kind of tools around it and define its norms of functioning, and then even the avant-garde also can become a very academic model within a certain discourse of historical representation and how we look at it. So when we look at avant-garde also, that we, in Europe, we can realize that the notion of the new was also exploring inwards towards deconstructing the existing forms and identifying gaps to find new avenues. Now, this is, again, another method of the new in which we have seen the idea of the new has been explored. I was thinking of theater workshops of Badal Sarkar, where he would be doing games like dot games, like imagining that we are in a rectangular cube and we are dots in a space. And we are so tightly fitted that we are equidistant from the wall between all the individual participants. And there is no space to move. Now, how in this kind of a condition, one person can move from his own position to another direction or another point? And it becomes an impossible game because everything is so much tightly fixed in the space that it is very difficult to change position. But then soon the group realizes that the notion of movement is not about the individual motion, but when the group moves, the whole system moves. So that was one method which the process makes you understand that it's always has to be in certain way. But how to move in between spaces? So it was about finding gaps. So how do you look at gaps within a certain system, certain methods or certain ways of operation? And new spaces, new ideas emerges from those kind of tools where you identify gaps within the existing systems of operations. So, and the world of, so in that context, I was also sort of encountered a student who came from Bodoland, and she was doing her master's in visual representation and in painting department, and she asked me a question, okay, why do you have to pursue new when there are so many communities in different traditions who are doing things for ages, for over and over again? So why in the art college I have to find something new? Or I've been asked to find a new way of representation. So this was a question that really brings you or confront you in terms of what is the method of education system that we are running, in a sense that this whole idea of the new is always about certain system of representation and a counter argument of another form of representation. But is it new, or is it a movement of different kinds of finding new centers in the new? Because even within avant-garde, if we look at it, this whole idea of breaking away from a tradition, it's not just really breaking away from it, but finding other centers of operation to look at the present system of center in which you are operating. So decentering the center and finding other, and in the process we find that all those smaller centers also becomes new forms of representations or new forms of looking at culture, looking at cultural production and knowledge relationships. And today we all know that modernism is not just a Eurocentric system, but it is a center of multiple modernisms that has emerged in different parts of the world. Of course, it's an encounter with industrialization and also about your own identity, about your own position or situation, how you exist. And it has been always a conversation between different traditions, and the idea of the new has emerged. And in that context, I was thinking how the institute from where I come, Vishwabharati, how it was also proposing a kind of another center of idea of knowledge production. And it was taking certain basic frameworks into consideration that, okay, there was the colonial Victorian education policy, but also there was this idea of streamlining education into very specific discipline-based knowledge exercises. So how to situate an institute in a place, how to situate an institute in a situation, and not make the institute as the place where you bring in different resources and develop something. So I think that itself reverses the whole idea of what we mean by engaging with education as everyday life and everyday practice. So placing the institute in Shantiniketan is, I think, a very strategic and very important engagement that Tagore initiated 100 years back. And it was providing, I think, 2-3 very important, quote-unquote, new in that sense, methods of looking at education, looking at artistic practice. I will just go into the slide a little bit. Because when we talk about new, I'm more interested in historicizing new as a kind of phenomenon, not just this very unique encounter that we are having at this point. So if you look at Shant, I will just scroll around certain slides and try to elaborate my argument of the new, and then looking at the new inside an old institution. I mean, because Shantiniketan is also, I mean, Vishwabharati is also a practice that has experienced 100 years evolution. And within the system also there are different layers in which the institution has transformed itself, being a private initiative, in a sense individual's idea that has been adapted and then transformed into a collective idea. And then how, as Sir was talking about, how it became a university officially in 1952 as part of the national policy. And what changes it brings in, and how, as a pedagogical process, we can look at into these tools that are existing in the system of the practice within the university can be reviewed or re-engaged in other methods of, or maybe looking at certain, shifting the centers of those different tools that were being implemented within Shantiniketan to other engagements of way of looking at process, practice, community relationships, human relationships in the contemporary context in which we stand now. So basically, Shantiniketan, as you can see, as you all know, it's, I don't want to go too much detail into the institutional practice of Kala Bhavan or Vishwabharati as a whole, because it became a university in 1921, but it was a university which was trying to find a kind of meeting point of different scholars, practitioners from all over the world who can come, encounter and engage. Oh, sorry. F5. Oh. আমি করে দিচ্ছি। So one of the important tools that Tagore introduced was the whole idea of taking education into the natural context, nature, and nature not just about being in nature, but it is also about engaging with nature as a everyday lifestyle and learning from the transforming character of the nature and how it evolves with your personal relationship with it. And the other was the idea of the circularity or education not as a linear formation the way we are habituated in terms of this observer and the presenter or the person who is taking the class and the rest is in sequence of gradations or certain kind of backbencher and the front bencher, as Badal would often talk about it. But it also sort of created new spaces for making and learning, which was very much embedded in the natural context and the natural setting of Shantiniketan. And also, this is a mural by Binod Bihari Mukherjee. So there are these different kinds of reviewing or re-engaging with different traditions of image making, whether it is about past traditions of mural or about the different two methods of representation that's happening in Asia, especially China and Japan, and also Java, Sumatra, and this creating a certain kind of holistic idea of knowledge where design is not separated from art, or art is not just individuals' exploration, but a conversation of different tools of making. The other part of it is the kind of ritual traditions which are being introduced, which were connected more as a kind of a cyclic annual community engagement. So it's also about building up a community through the system in which you're functioning and connecting it to the larger cycle of the natural evolution of seasons and addressing them not just through understanding or looking at nature, but also engaging it bodily through performative actions, through process, through performances, through songs, music. Walking becomes a very important tool. The Boitalik, which happens in Shantiniketan early morning or evening, celebrating certain specific events, that becomes a point of learning both from your peers and also from the space, the situation in which you are engaging and encountering. So the other experience that I would like to share is this collective idea of making, where together with the individual exploration of the studio practices, students are coming together to make things. And that becomes an encounter with history, that becomes an encounter with time, that becomes an encounter with tradition, and find new ways of engaging with images. I mean, Black House is one exercise which I think is very unique in the history of university education, is that it's an archival conversation. It is a dialogue with documents. I mean, people have drawn something from an image, made reliefs from paintings or from other photographs. And this exercise itself creates a very multi-layered method which becomes still very relevant in the context of contemporary time when we are, inside the archival time and mode of representation, and nothing really goes beyond the image in which we exist and survive. These are some of the images of Black House, which I think are very significant, how the Harappan seal is being scaled up, or the lion is being represented on a scaled up situation. So there are images, motifs from history which are being animated and reenacted in the present, and it becomes a conversation of different traditions coming together. And that is happening through individual students and faculty collaboration and making. Of course, in the present situation, we are trying hard to reclaim those methodological moments and not necessarily the time as a context. And I think I will come to that in my next part of my presentation. So the whole context of Shantiniketan becomes a very critical dialogue in the contemporary time, because it is a transforming institution, because the way it was started as a private initiative by an individual thinker, and his idea of history, his idea of knowledge, his idea of world is being brought together by and being carried and reflected and reenacted by many other practitioners who are coming and joining him. I mean, it's a very unique situation that people are coming with similar thoughts and similar ideas. Because in the present context of the university education, it is also another form of multiplicity, because what Tagore was working with was another kind of multiplicity where there are different kinds of experts bringing in different kinds of knowledge, but there is an understanding of bringing the world together. But with the transformation of the university model into a nationalist framework, there is always certain code of conduct. There is certain kind of bureaucratic systems and methods of working in which certain structure of classroom education is being framed. And also, I think that everybody who are being recruited or who are being brought into the education system are not coming from the same school of learning. So that creates a very unique situation in the, especially within Shantiniketan. I would say that post-1970s, it became that encounter of traditions and practices that were rejected at one point in Shantiniketan. I mean, there was a whole group of faculties who came from Calcutta to Shantiniketan, bringing in the whole Victorian knowledge that Shantiniketan has been resisting as a tool of operation. We have now faculties who are trained in those methods, in those models, but also looking at modernism as a transformative situation of the realism that was being practiced. And that, I think, created another situation in the Shantiniketan context, which I think is very unique, which some people have, I mean, there are different ideas of eclecticism that has evolved within the Shantiniketan model also, that the earlier eclecticism was about creating a center and looking at different traditions and bringing it in. But now, post-1970s, we are in a situation where the multiplicity is the context, where different kinds of knowledge making is encountering to formulate a certain strategy of future art education in what way it will happen, like model study or painting with oil, canvas painting, all these different tools which at one point was not considered because of its association with the Victorian and the Eurocentric, mostly Victorian method of representation was not included in the curriculum that much. But post-50s, 60s, and especially post-70s, it becomes a very specific curriculum where you find these different tools are being addressed with a methodology that is necessarily not repeating the Victorian strategy, or that we are not trying to create or understand the academic realism in a sense, but trying to re-engage with those tools on an individual level, to understand, to engage with this historicity of realism also. And a certain form of representation was emerging within Shantiniketan, within Vishwabharati. So, and I think the other aspect which becomes very important is that how to, in this kind of multiplicity of encounters of tools and process, how do we reclaim the idea of the holistic knowledge process? Because many of the time there is a kind of separation that I have found that has happened within the larger community-oriented practices that were there in Vishwabharati as a everyday life, and what happens inside the discipline-specific practices. Of course, there are overlaps, like the tree planting sessions where students would join together and would make designs, construction. So that was becoming an extension, and especially in today's time, it's looked upon as an extracurricular activity or the informal activity. But if you look at it in a much more closer perspective, we will realize that those activities are very much part of the integral part of the academic process. But academics was not defined as academics the way we understand it in other institutes. So this network of practices which are more curriculum and formal structured practices within the syllabus, and these community-based practices that are happening around is the next network which is that art pedagogy in Shantiniketan or the cultural pedagogy in Shantiniketan, and not necessarily one against the other, or one being, okay, inferior form of practices, another being the core area of practice. So this, I think, was challenged. This attitude and approach was challenged in some form, where there was a certain kind of choice being created as something being cultural and something being art. And that divide was also emerging within the notion of post-70s practices. And this brings us to a very important idea of what is the established norms of academism and what is the peripheral norm of academism. Is there anything peripheral within the academic space? And does that needs to be also sustained and survived in the process of identifying what is new? And this is a very burning issue, because what is the center even within the university practice is also something that is constantly shifting its position, because sometimes places, I mean, if you just go to Vishwabharati also, you will find that if you stand inside Kalabhavan and look at the rest of the university, it's one kind of a system. And if you go and stand in front of Amrakunja and look at the larger network of the university, it's another form of relationships that is emerging. So I find it as a very dynamic context, because then you have different forms of centers within the university context that creates choice of position, or also movement between different centers within the university. Of course, the notion of interdisciplinarity that university model of education proposes is something that is still missing within the pedagogical model in Shantiniketan. I was just remembering similar ideas of the new that was happening in Bauhaus in 1919 also, that were similar approach that got extended all over the world in different forms, in different interpretations. And I had the opportunity also to be associated with some of these initiatives in the 100-year celebration. And what I found also in Bauhaus is that there is a similar tension emerging in the present context, where it has become a UNESCO Heritage Center, and the architecture is now being protected as a UNESCO site, and you cannot really touch the architecture, but they have found ways in which to transplant the new and retain the UNESCO heritage. So as two layers, they operate even within the interiors. Also, there are two layers. One is the heritage wall, and one is the new construction in which you are operating. I didn't include any of the images from there, but there are different segments in which I think the history survives, but they have been able to transform and find new extensions of it, whether it is in the public domain, creating departments that engages with public art and other forms of practices. So now I will just go into some, do I have time? How much time? So I will just like to share some of my own experience of being within the academic framework and trying to work with this idea of being within the established norms of the curriculum to project a certain peripheral methods of working, where process becomes a very active content in the process of looking at certain established ideas of study and representation, and trying to open up the process of making as a holistic relationship of image and space experience. In this context, I would like to introduce this idea of pedagogy as art practice. I mean, where I look at pedagogy not as this educator's role, but as a working relationship, where you work together to develop certain methods of working. And I situate the institute as an interface between the public and the private. So it comes, a lot of its tools comes from the notion of how public art has also evolved, that from this monument-making Victorian idea of vertical public sculptures to a more conversational public art where community engages. And I more and more have been trying to look at the institutional space as a transforming community that emerges and evolves. And as a pedagogue, I mean, how to engage with those time and spaces of the new generations over and over again to look at new frameworks of working together. So these are certain ideas that I would like to share, that It explores study not as an analysis from outside, but a participatory process of acknowledging the present as a dialogical state of collective memory. It explores study as an interdisciplinary cross-section of multiple practices of different disciplines. So pedagogy as art practice is a process to unravel the end product-oriented art teaching of neoliberal corporatized world to a more process-based collective working and learning and unlearning disciplinary specificities, and move towards an art practice that is about making and breaking, seeing and reading, and experiencing the performative physical moment of being in a multisensory way. So this is one such process that I that evolved while conversing with the students with the idea of simple seal screen as a method and how it can become part of a performance or performative context. So basically, I was inviting students to sit with and discussing on certain issues and inviting them to identify images with which they would like to expose themselves. They would like to place themselves as object, looking at, questioning the idea of study as this fixed position of observation, looking at from one point of view, and where the model is becomes this silent material in front of you. And this led to a 10-year-long process where every final year students batch would be invited to join the process of shadow casting, as we call it. And so this became a process of understanding how different groups of students were passing from the institute, what is their point of view of looking at the institute, what, studying here, and what they aspire beyond the space. So this was the final display. So many of my queries has been around the idea of the study itself, which has so much of colonial baggage of observing and observer and the representation. And I often try to make it more interactive, participatory, so that the idea of representation is not singular one-point view, but multiple ideas of representations can come together. So this is a model study exercise that we did. I'm going a little bit inside the curriculum. So where we did theater games workshops to understand the idea of notion of body from a very personal point of view. Instead of inviting a model and drawing them, it was a workshop to understand your own body in conversation with your friends in the classroom. And that led to sculptural games of making sculptures with body, and then it moved into more interpersonal understanding of who are your best friends and how much you know the person. So from there it started, and then it moved into very intimate journeys of looking at each other, which then was translated into certain gestures. Those research led to a certain gestural forms, which then each individual student was making a figure of his or her friend as an architectural framework, and then going further detail into their understanding of their personal life, the kind of cultural background they come from, and develop a research from those encounters to a certain collage structures, which then became the configuration of the body. So individual student approached it in different ways. I'll just go very fast. So this was again another exercise with still life, where I thought that the idea of the still life had its own relevance in terms of representing the society without the human presence of the human body in a certain period of time. But now in today's context, the idea of framing and representation has evolved from this anti-photography to photography becoming a very integral part of the image making process. And with mobile, everybody's taking photograph. Even if you ask somebody to do a study, they will first take a photograph and then do the study. So why not start it from the photographic exercise? So I sort of invited the students to go around the campus and look for spaces which they think has a quality of a still life, that it is being arranged or being left, and it leaves a kind of a memory of the human action or the human context. So they came back with different documents from this campus, and then looking at those photographs, we did a revisit of looking at the materials with which those things are being made. So it was a second layer of research that they started looking at, okay, this site, this object, what are the materials, how it is being made. And that finally, with their canvases, we created architectural setup, which becomes like individual zones for individual students. And the whole activity was to reconstruct that experience of the live experience of the site and the photograph as a conversation to construct almost a scenographic situation. So the studio was transformed into almost like a film set, film situation, where the students, they reconstructed all those small zones which they have encountered through the material that they have seen, that the materials they have experienced physically, and then reenact them in the studio, which then evolved into again another drawing exercise of selecting materials, selecting items, and create magnifications of things in the studio walls. So what they have created as a scenography was then reconstructed of their choice of material and of their memories into a larger construction. Am I beyond time? So I will just skip these things, and I would like to show just one project, and I will complete there. This is so while working together in the institutional space, I often try to take the methods of learning or research as a collective framework and invite students to do collective research. So this was an exhibition project which was happening in Shantiniketan, curated by Amit Mukherjee, on land and gendered practices. So I invited 9 students, girl students, to look at the idea of what is the context of the gendered land, in a sense, because this curatorial project was looking at Plato's cave to Hitler's bunkers, and then looking at the context of the position of women in between, and how the memory of the land is looked by women protagonists. So we created a certain kind of revisited the Pluto's geometrical forms that represented nature, the 5 elements, and how he sort of constructed different polyhedrons, and created this installation inside the Nandan library, where we were looking at texts coming from different time in history, whether it is mythological texts or historical texts or more critical texts written in contemporary times by women theoreticians and novelists. And it was a reading session that happened. And this textile that you saw coming down are lycra materials, which are a Second World War byproduct, petroleum byproduct. And it brought back again the idea of the body as this perfect body and this Greco-Roman body in the context, again through the textile and the construction of the leggings and other forms of stretchable materials. So we wanted to stretch that material through other forms of bodies and expressions. So these were all evolved through the different theater games and reading process. And through the reading, we were identifying certain kind of gestures in the process of the theater workshops. So these are some of the ways. And this was an 8-day performance, every day, 8 hours. So that was also something which I thought the students responded very intimately, in a sense, reading and walking and reading and walking. And then viewers are coming and going, they're coming and sitting in the space. So also taking art education from the notion of classroom exercises to more public interfaces, to engage with people who would come to see the space, come to engage with your process of making, and create a kind of conversational interface of, how do we look at research, how do you look at process of making. So this was then taken to JNU, and it was performed in the open air. And finally, it was also performed in Dhaka Biennale. So I invited the students if they would like to join me in a project, and we went to Dhaka, but also collaborated with the Dhaka University students. So a new group was formed. So there were new texts and new contexts were generated, and that emerged into a new model of performances in other institutional spaces which are going into a more public encounter for the students. So I will just read this last paragraph and I will complete it. In recent times in India, the impact of the education policies in every spheres of academic practice is transforming the faculty-student, faculty-institution, and student-institution relationship as an information keeper, much in the light of Paulo Ferreira, what he was referring in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed about the banking system and what is the relationship of teachers and student context and how it has been. The whole idea of exploration of experimentation and failure is no more a criteria of learning, especially for fine arts institutes. The credit our specific interactions with students is converting the idea of workshop and studio-based practice into a training-based practice where the notion of time, leisure, and transformative knowledge exchange is losing its specificity and possibility. The campus art activity in Kolabhavan is not only a reference to a workshop-based individual and collective engagement, it is also a site of pedagogic discourse that is actively part of the academic curriculum. With the numerous artworks made by its faculty who had worked there, the institution becomes a site of discourse on the multiplicity of tools and methods of practices. The living heritage of Vishwabharati, which is declared as a UNESCO heritage in 2022, means the legacy of its daily practice. It is important that the university reflects on the relationship between the institution and its pedagogues towards a holistic form of practice and projects, its legacy of multiplicity of aesthetic encounter. Pedagogy in contemporary art has to rejuvenate itself from its position of information provider to a more direct engagement with academic curriculum and evolve new frameworks of workshop-based collective dialogue between individuals. The divide between individual practice and pedagogy needs to be readdressed in a new working relationship. Fine Arts Institute has to reclaim the earlier space of individual exploration as a collective workshop-based dialogue within institutional spaces. Many of the artist pedagogues of Kolabhavan Vishwabharati since its initiation engaged with the institutional space reflected his passion, love, and critical perceptions about the role of institutions in relationship to individual practice and refers to a disappearing trend of pedagogy as practice. The whole emphasis on working relationship with the institutional space is based on a creative and experimental conversation and not merely a job. Institutional spaces need to reflect on the role of fine arts inside the institute and not merely a skill-providing job-oriented practice, but a site for critical discourse on individual and collective innovation and learning. Thank you. Yeah, sure. I hope I am not beyond time.
Thank you so much, sir, for those wonderful insights. Now we have our next speaker, Mr. Indrapramit Roy. Mr. Indrapramit Roy is an artist, teacher, and occasional writer. He has been teaching at the alma mater Faculty of Fine Arts, MSU Baroda since 1995. He studied at Vishwabharati Shantiniketan and the Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University of Baroda, followed by an MA in painting at the Royal College of Art, London on INLAC scholarship. In 3-decade-long career, Indrapramit has shown widely in India. He has had 20 solo exhibitions so far and participated in numerous group exhibitions. He has shown in important international venues such as Berlin, London, New York, San Francisco, Palo Alto, Cairo, Moscow, Sydney, Bangkok, to name a few. In 2014, he executed a large 26 feet by 12 feet work on the new Terminal 2 of Mumbai International Airport. Honors and fellowships include INLAC Scholarship, Erasmus Exchange Scholarship to spend a term as the HDK Berlin and Site des Arts Paris, the Fulbright Scholarship to USA, and artist in residence at the Siena Art Institute, Italy. He has also awarded artist Prafullo Dave Kala Samman in 2024. Indrapramit has edited an issue on art education for Art Varta and contributed articles for Critical Collective Webzine, Sangit Natak Academy Journal, Ahana Art Journal, Chinha, Nandan, Depart Bangladesh, Times Higher Education Supplement London, etc. He also contributes to popular art magazines such as Take on Art, Art India, Artist, and a few others. He is one of the founding members and a trustee of Foundation for Indian Art and Education. With a huge round of applause, let's welcome Indra sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaurabh, for a very generous introduction. I hope I'm audible. Am I? Yeah. Um, it's been a great opportunity to come and address such luminaries that we've had in the panel and also colleagues, friends, young students in a burgeoning university. It's been an honor and a pleasure to address you, and thank you very much, SNU and the organizers, that is Dr. Shengupto, Shoma, and everybody who's associated with organizing this symposium. Oh, you okay? No, no, not at all. Show any visuals. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that are part of my experience of being in the area of education for last 30 years, and the things that I've been seeing, the things that are changing, the so-called new that Sanchan was addressing, the idea of the academic and the concept of academia. I'm just going to look at some of these issues and basically share my observations with you. And it would be nice to have a discussion at the end of the session, which I think would perhaps make it more rounded, if I may say so. So the topic that I've given a heading to this, and it's called The Challenges of Teaching Art in Universities, and Artist Teachers' Perspective. Because in our time, at least when I was inducted into the university education, I was given to believe that, you know, if you are a practicing artist, then you bring something to your teaching. It's increasingly seems to be moving away from that, which has been a cause of concern for many of us for a variety of reasons and for very obvious reasons. So we need to actually strategize and find strategies to work within this, what we call system. And to do that, it's very important to understand and have a fair amount of clarity about what we are supposed to do. Because what we are supposed to do and what we are asked to do often do not match, or what you are expected to do, and what we think is the right way to do it. And I think to some extent, Shanchan's paper was very much addressing that issue. Or what is the concept of new? How do you bring that in? How do you, you can use even subterfuge within the system to beat this whole imposed idea of this credit equivalence equates to this many hours. It doesn't work most of the time. And we know it. We know it in our bones because we've been dealing with, teaching, learning, as they love to call it. Um, and where is the learning bit in the teaching? If you reduce everything to just imparting information, and which is considered knowledge and knowledge generation, these are the terms which are free floating in the academia. So in the paper I'm going to just look at some of these things and perhaps open the doors for further discussion. That is the whole point of this paper, and that is precisely why I thought I will restrict this to just the written word and the spoken word, so that we can actually focus in some of the ideas very essential. So I'm sorry, everybody else has been sharing lots of visuals. My paper is going to be rather dry without any visuals, so you will have to concentrate on what I'm saying. Historically, the first university to formally offer bachelor and master's degree in fine arts was Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. In 1949, the erstwhile Baroda College became the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, helmed by a visionary, our first Vice Chancellor, Srimati Hansaben Mehta, who herself was an educationist, a writer, a parliamentarian, a part of the first UN delegation on human rights. She was a remarkable person. The declaration that in the Human Rights Forum, which says all human beings are born equal, is actually inserted by Hansaben. The original version said all men are born equal. So the men was replaced by human beings under her guidance. And she was a freedom fighter. She worked very closely with Gandhiji. She wrote for children. So a very remarkable character, because in those days, to even imagine a fine arts faculty as part of a regular university must have been extremely radical. She must have faced a lot of roadblocks, and yet she did it. And so in some sense, Baroda in the post-independent India was the first in many ways. And one of the unique things that happened in the Baroda experiment was that it was blessed from the very beginning to have different strands, or if you like, different verticals of pedagogy that were incorporated in it. One of the things is that it took certain ideas from the Shantiniketan pedagogy, because two of its founder fathers came from Shantiniketan, Shanku Chaudhary and K.G. Subramanian. N.S. Bendre, whereas came from the J.J. tradition, but he also had been to Shantiniketan. So he was the other leg, which kind of looked at the academic practices of the so-called colonial art schools. And of course, then we had a third strand, which was the emphasis on the practices of the living traditions of India. And also, to some extent, a certain cutting edge, at that point, cutting edge American ideas of art education that came through the Barnes Foundation, from where our first dean came. So all these things made it quite a radical place. And also the insistence that art is not necessarily about just imparting a set of skills, but it's also engaging the mind, because we are in the process of making a whole generation of artists who will be serving this fledgling nation, which has just been independent 3 years before. So this whole atmosphere, you can imagine, was quite electric. And as a result, the institute became a role model, and for several decades after that, it was the model that was followed in setting up art institutions which were either became part of the universities, or the universities actually started departments of fine arts. But then the problem starts. Yesterday, Ashok Babu was mentioning this whole idea of UGC. Now, UGC as a body was initially supposed to be a body which is not prescriptive. It is suggestive. And it has eventually become a body which is basically prescribing things, centralizing things, simplifying things, and channelizing everything into a mold or a model which is extremely limited and limiting. But how do we come to that? That art teaching institutions constantly face this piquant situation where they're being asked to fit into a template that is devised for another discipline, rather than finding a template for itself. The fact that some institutions are under All India Council for Technical Education, or the AICTE, while the majority are administered by UGC, is indicative of this policy confusion. We still haven't quite made up our minds whether art is a technical education or part of the broader humanities discipline. The third category altogether for art, design, architecture, music, performing arts, theater, etc., seem beyond the pale, at least as of now. And we heard how, NID was planning a completely different model, which again was, kind of pressurized to conform. And I think some of the confusion, and I hear this word academia being branded about by everybody, left, right, and center. And it's a much abused term in my view. What does it mean in relation to art education? The general idea of university education is based on Plato's idea of academia in ancient Greece. The model dealt with Sophia, or wisdom, that involved teaching God, philosophy, language, polemics, mathematics, geometry, metaphysics, etc. Art making was never part of this, because art making was considered, to use the Greek word techne, from where the word technical comes from, that required hands-on training. It was never part of this idea of the Greek academia. Art institutes, on the other hand, derived from a much later model of academia dell'arte of the Renaissance. The artist guilds that produced major artists, and then the idea of the academia was further refined by people like, say, Sir Joshua Reynolds in the 18th century, who became the first president of the Royal Academy of Arts in England. He was knighted by King George, only the second English artist to be so honored. And Reynolds was very keen to prove that artists were far from being just skilled artisans, were actually intellectuals. And his discourses was a set of series of lectures delivered at the Academy between 1769 and 1790, remembered for their erudition, awareness of history, and perception. And in one of the lectures, he expressed the opinion that invention, strictly speaking, I'm quoting, is little more than a new combination of those images which have been previously gathered and deposited in the memory of humankind, I suppose, quote close. So talking about the new is also looking back at the past. The new is all not necessarily all that new. It is also a retelling and a reinterpretation. While the traditional Indian artists learned from family and workshops, the colonial model of art schools in India came from this idea of art academies, particularly that of England of the 19th century. Now, so there is that confusion in understanding what is the model of academia. And I think that often comes in the way when you are having a discussion with a colleague from another discipline within the university. Because the model of academia that you have in mind, the model academia he or she have in mind is very, very different. And this needs to be understood by us, and then, perhaps some of the confusions that we have about what academia is can be addressed. Now, teaching, what is the problem of art teaching? Because it is ultimately a subject with no correct answers. Most other disciplines are teaching things where there is a correct answer. The singularly important aspect that makes teaching art different is the fact that there are no correct answers in art, especially contemporary art. No fixed yardsticks that can be applied universally. Every student is required to find his or her own answer to their own search, and that requires an extraordinary level of one-to-one contact and empathy between the teacher and the student. Art students must be encouraged to question the set path. That is why, and that is the way we realize the potential of the student artist. This needs constant mentoring at an individual one-to-one level, especially as the student moves up to the higher classes. Now, teaching art requires a personal connect that is very special and unique to the discipline. You're constantly playing multiple roles of a teacher, mentor, counselor, and chief critic. In so many other professions, the models of perfection is a given. The lawyer and the doctor practice their calling. The plumber and the carpenter know what they will be called upon to do. None of them have to spin the work out of themselves, discover its laws, and then present themselves inside out to the public gaze. And that is precisely what visual artists are required to do. In this, they even differ from most musicians, where the laws are at least clear-cut and well-known. We do not remember artists who followed the rules diligently. You remember those who made art from which rules inevitably follow. This is precisely why the Guru Shishya Parampara is not viable in contemporary art education. If we forget, then technicalities have a way of insidiously taking on all trappings of aesthetic standards. For instance, there is a widespread agreement that it is a genuine challenge to impart rich blacks and subtle tonal qualities in a print, be it etching, lithography, or a black and white photograph. In my personal experience, this seemingly neutral observation gave rise to a large percentage of printmaking teachers for whom the criteria of judging a print focuses entirely on the virtuoso technical perfection needed to produce such desired tones at the cost of all other markers. That is, the ability to create such tones often quite literally becomes the primary content of the print. This point can be illuminated further by taking the example of the academic manner of painting still taught in art schools, where the propriety of the method and the technical perfection becomes the primary content of the painting. In other words, the technical perfection becomes the axiom by which a painting is judged. The ultimate problem of making technical mastery as good art is an already defined goal, a correct answer, rather than allowing one to find a new idea or a new method. And I'm not against teaching what K.G. Subramaniam refers to as a packet of skills. But it is the relatively easy part of teaching. The ultimate job lies in making the young aspirant artists learn to take risks and see for themselves. Then theory and art, that is another very contentious area. There are many contentious issues that bedevil our attitude towards teaching art, and I will just touch upon a few that are most commonplace. In my experience, I have been encountering teachers of the studio-based subjects who treat teaching any theory as either a waste of time or at best a necessary evil, more like a concession to the university requirements, but with hardly a practical value. The statement of Barnett Newman that artists need theory as much as birds need ornithology succinctly expressed that idea. He might have made that statement in a context where theory seemed overwhelming the creative spirit, but generally speaking, it is a good idea, tested and tried, that artists do gain a lot from being exposed to art of their predecessors. They also need to be aware of the interconnectedness of art and society that produced it. It saves them from reinventing the wheel in their own work and come up with something fresh. Now, there is also a need to assess the courses taught in the name of art history and locate the blind spots. One such obvious blind spot is folk and tribal art traditions. Despite our lip service to the thriving living traditions of folk and tribal art in this country, the courses in most universities remain woefully oblivious. We simply do not teach anything about them. And there is a considerable amount of art production that occurs in the so-called outsider art arena that remains outside the purview of most curricula. Our average art student is more aware about 19th century French naive artists such as Henri Rousseau, but completely ignorant about, say, Nek Chansaini, the visionary artist of the Chandigarh Rock Garden, or the great Madhubani artist Ganga Devi. We still use outdated nomenclatures such as Far Eastern, Middle Eastern, that essentially betrays the Eurocentric bias, rarely stopping to think who's Far East or why countries to our west should be counted as Middle East. Syllabi more or less stands for a very clear chronological history of art that stands mostly on just two legs, Western and Indian. Nothing else matters. Our immediate neighborhood matters even less. The contemporary theories, the philosophical debates are another blind spot. The world that we live in is so utterly different from the world we grew up in, and the difference is overwhelming and bewildering. Art has incorporated conceptual areas that were not even considered domains of art, such as critical theory, social sciences, environmental studies, gender, caste, queer studies, etc., etc., etc. It's a very long list. We simply are unable to equip students with a modicum of understanding of the important issues that stare them in the face. These are just a few examples, merely indicative of how a constantly evolving scenario throws up new challenges that need to be tackled. The studio classroom, well, I come to that because that's where I have been found mostly. And we stand at a juncture in history where the visual treasure of the whole mankind are available at the click of a mouse or increasingly a touch of the screen. At no point in the history have we witnessed the phenomena where the achievements of every country, every era, in every genre is available to all. It is all very democratic. But the flip side, there is simply an overwhelming amount of information, and I dare say misinformation, that is also available to us. So negotiating such a landscape is a daunting task without the right tools and the basic training. Try searching Madhubani or Mithila painting in the most popular Google search engine and see the result. Page after page of bad, fake Madhubani painting done by amateurs of all hues will inundate the screen before you can get to any genuine example. So negotiating such minefields to get to what you're looking for is a task in itself. It's very easy to say, oh, well, that is available. Just go and search in the social media. The search itself can be maddening. Even if you keep that problem aside for the time being, such as the overdose of visuals to make the job of young artists all the more complex, it's if not outright difficult because they have to negotiate this predominantly visual culture of the contemporary world to arrive at their own voices. This is a unique phenomenon of our time that needs to be acknowledged. And at no point in history was it possible to access such a wide variety of art practices with such minimal effort. The rapidly changing face of technology and its increasing speed is impacting all aspects of human behavior, and naturally, art is no exception. The pace at which the world has changed in the last 30 years is absolutely phenomenal. The world we inhabit is radically different from that of our parents or even the world many of us have grown up in. The proliferation of the audiovisual media in all aspects of our life impacts our ways of seeing and our visual environment. A major part of our visual experience today is lens-based and indirect. The world of art embraced technology and at the same time is struggling to hold on to some common universal values. And there are opposing tendencies, between the machine-made and the handmade. And the gap seems to be exacerbating, So, the moment you make a choice, so there are so many options and choices. And to ask these fundamental questions that why am I doing what am I doing is something that is rarely done in a classroom. Because it's certain assumptions that we have. And if you really analyze those assumptions, the assumptions have come to us from another century in another time frame. Then you contrast that with universities that are increasingly using templates and management jargons that seem alien to the basic ethos of teaching art. And take, for instance, the constant chatter about knowledge generation. It can be very misleading because teaching art is more about seeing, feeling, expressing, finding the right visual tools to communicate them. These are more tacit, experiential, aesthetic knowledge and less about explicit knowledge as is commonly understood as knowledge in academia. An MFA or an MVA degree is not considered terminal anymore, but a research degree, by default a PhD, is a prerequisite for most appointments for university level teaching. And particularly if you want to. How we get to decide that a PhD is essential for teaching art requires another paper, and I shall not delve into it here. But since a PhD is seen essential for appointment and promotion, there is a scramble to get one. For this very reason, the word research is also understood very partially. Certain kinds of research that are de rigueur in many other disciplines are privileged while others are routinely ignored. Visual research is something that most universities barely acknowledge or comprehend. And it is a common experience of teachers involved in teaching art in the universities that wherever art is made part of the university system, the university tries its level best to fit it within the existing pattern developed for teaching another subject. And this attitude that art teaching has to be fitted in an already existing template is not very helpful, to say the least. And I guess that applies to design, to some other disciplines also. Now, this existing problem is compounded when research and PhD is made into a routine degree required for getting a job without considering research aptitude of the candidate. It is a recipe for the kind of chaos and dilution we are witnessing at the moment. Contrary to the belief that it will ensure quality, it ends up devaluing the master's degree and replace it with another 4 years of study for another exalted degree that requires an entirely different set of skills. Hence, we have a skewed situation where there is a premium on a doctoral degree and they are only of a kind, the written thesis. So you can't still make a doctoral degree by making a film or doing an exhibition, or, there are so many other forms. It is possible to do that. Let us quickly take a look at the meaning of the word research. According to the Webster Dictionary, it means 1, a careful or diligent search, 2, studious inquiry or examination, especially investigation or experimentation aimed at, I emphasize, discovery and interpretation of facts, revision of accepted theories in the light of new facts. And third, the methodical search for knowledge. Now, these definitions are clear that they do not cover most of what takes place in an art or design studio. Artists often do create knowledge, but they are fundamentally different because they are not necessarily verifiable or produce the same set of results in a similar condition as in scientific research. So we can safely surmise that all knowledge creation is not part of the rubric of what we generally consider research. And research by studio practice is yet to find acceptance in the portals of Indian universities. Our misplaced emphasis on academic titles and self-perpetuating belief that all wisdom resides within the academia makes it well nigh impossible for anybody from outside the academia to teach. The recent phenomena of appointing a token professor of practice seems like an afterthought that is purportedly wants to plug this hole but falls short at many levels. Professor James Elkins, the distinguished scholar and art historian associated with the School of Art Institute of Chicago, had suggested 8 different variants of possible research way back in 2004. Even if we take a limited view of those 8 kinds of research identified, it is possible to cull out the 2 most relevant ones that needs to be looked at, apart from traditional old PhD, currently the only mode available in India. One is the obvious one, the practice-based research that requires the artist to co-opt the traditional research requirement of universities, but with the distinction of having a studio practice component that is demonstrative and supported by a written document. In short, a mix of work produced during the period and a written thesis. The second kind is what I suspect Professor Chatterjee was indicating yesterday, that a system of a professional doctorate awarded for practice of distinction in the creative arts, performance, and design. A prerequisite for this will be either a program loosely associated with the teaching institution or a professional body on the lines of Indian Medical Association or Indian Institute of Architects, or it can be just recognizing somebody's contribution to the discipline, and this can happen only to mid-career artists, and needless to add, requires a bias-free mechanism, which is in itself a tall order. Now, these are, of course, in the realm of possibilities, but we need to clue into the debate that has raged art academia of the world over in the first 2 decades of the new millennium. We seem to be nowhere near the debate, because it's either you take it or you leave it kind of a position. It's like, you are either with me or you're against me. The importance of play in creativity is what good teachers provide their students is something close to the vulnerability found in a personal relationship. A kind of artistic and intellectual intimacy that lets others see how to react to the world around us, how to respond with an awareness, in short, how to see and how to play. And play is essential to art making. It is generally frowned upon in the academia as frivolous and undeserving of the seriousness of purpose. But it's good to remember that without the element of play, there is no creativity and no art, or at best, very boring academic art. In the end, it all comes down to what creativity expert Ken Robinson calls being in one's element. When you do what you want to do, and you do something that you do best, and additionally you enjoy doing most, that is when you are in your element. That is true about making art as well as teaching art, because they are both creative pursuits. The basic similarity is also the desire to share. If you are not keen on sharing, then probably you are not meant to be a teacher. Teaching learning is a two-way street. A lot of things require systemic change, but if you teach, you also know that you gain as much from the interchange as your students. The classroom studio gives you the forum where ideas form and are often executed, as was very evident from Sanjay's presentation. It allows you to draw energy from young minds bubbling with energy and curiosity. It calls for your active engagement, patience, awareness, preparation, and a readiness to reinvent yourself. It keeps you alive. It is about time to look into the practices formed out of dead habit and reinvent the paradigm without getting overwhelmed necessarily but by what we call system. I know it's a daunting task, but all said and done, let us not forget that teaching remains a creative process in itself. John Steinbeck went a step further and said, a great teacher is as good as a great artist. So it is a bit of a give and take. I ended there so that we can take some questions and have an interesting interactive session, which we have been missing out so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful lecture. Now we'll go to a quick Q&A session. So for that, we'd request Shanchan sir and Indrapramit sir on stage for a quick Q&A session. I know Anonna and a lot of you have questions, so we'll have a Q&A session, and then after that we can go for the lunch. So Shanchan sir and Indrapramit sir.
Thank you, Indroda or Shonchanda. So my first question is to Indroda, that when you said that in case of printmaking, we already when we were students, we already had challenges that whether to grip the medium, the technique, or whether to explore our concept and how to build our own language. So in that case, how to solve this problem? Because should we like if we are not learning the technique properly, in case of painting also, sometimes we see that if we are not doing the oil properly, it may catch fungus, and at the same time, if we are not learning the printmaking techniques properly, we cannot get a good print. So how to balance this two, and especially when we are teaching how to handle this?
No, I have nothing against teaching how to take a good print. I think one must. But in most of our printmaking sections, we teach etching, lithography, some planographic technique, either plate lithography or stone lithography. In intaglio, you teach engraving, etching, and in relief print, it's either wood block or linocut. Now, none of these techniques, none of them are used anywhere else except as an artistic medium, right? Nobody uses engraving, etching, lithography for any kind of work other than artistic usage. There is no commercial use of it at all. Some of them are 500 years old, some of them are 200 years old, with the recent addition of something like, block prints like screen on serigraphy. But have you ever thought why we do these things only in printmaking department and why we have not taken on so many other forms of printmaking? And because it is a given, and I've nothing against. There are certain qualities that you get in a lithographic print which you will not get otherwise. As simple as that. There are certain qualities in a dry point which you will not get in an engraving or an etching, and vice versa. That line may look like a pen line, but it's not. It's very different. And that is why they survived. That is why artists have been using them. Okay? But it's not a frozen thing. I've rarely seen printmaking students, at least in the institutional level. When they pass out, they realize that they need an infrastructure to keep printmaking, so they move into other things. But that is more a force of compulsion, not necessarily a choice. But how much can we get stuck with the medium? I mean, ultimately, what are you producing? You're producing an image. So if the whole emphasis is on just pulling a good print, then I think that the thing is misplaced. I'm not saying for once that you need not teach how to pull a good print. But that cannot be the only axiom of judging the work. That is the mistake that we often make. And that is what I'm drawing attention to. It is not a criticism of, that you should not teach people to take good prints. No, not at all.
Yeah, that's what I asked, that how to balance these two. Do you have any idea? Because
yes, I think the student will take a good print. And some people are by nature messy, some people are rather perfectionist. So there are certain individual, tendencies, you may say. Or they're sort of prone to do certain things in a certain way. So yes, sometimes you do have to tell somebody that this is the right way. But ultimately, when I am looking at a visual, my emphasis should also be to the image that one is making. If my emphasis is entirely on what a lovely black or what a lovely tonal range, then it is as good as saying that the technique is the work. The technique is not the work. The technique is a medium through which I am arriving at the image. So ultimately, what am I looking at? The image. And this is a process. Now, I'm not saying I'm not against teaching the process. I have mentioned it in the paper. I'm not against teaching a packet of skills. But if you think that teaching the packet of skill is the end of the story, then we obviously differ. It is not. It is a stage. It's a step. So we tend to forget that why are we learning the step? Because then the step becomes the point of arrival. That's all.
Just to add what Anona was mentioning and into the whole conversation, if we think technicality as part of the education and, research to two different poles of teaching and practice and art education, then it is, we have a section of curricula where we take our students to different people like folk painters from different traditions. So, for instance, they can have that kind of hands-on technique to learn that technique from them. So, if we have to teach them only the techniques or different kinds of techniques, including oil painting, including tempera, printmaking, sculptural. I know somebody named Ramda who is a good, caster. So we don't appoint Ramda as a faculty here. So, and we are in a very complex situation. So if we have to address PhD as a benchmark to teach teach in the university, then how to deal with this kind of solitating position, I think.
I don't really
Anona
have
was...
an answer to that how, but I can only say that there are alternative PhDs, there are modes of reaching. That is basically, the trouble is to getting the people who matter to accept it. A PhD thesis can very well be a film. Why not? But
Without a
the
degree.
powers that be will are so bureaucratic in their thinking, and they're so set, and that is the struggle. But that apart, coming back to the basic level of teaching the skills. Yeah, I mean, teach the skills any which way. But what I also see that, we sometimes get these traditional artists to come and perform or work in front of the students. And we teach them as they are basically not looking that these guys are using a different language altogether. It's not just a style or the superficiality of the medium, which is something very easy to copy. Doing a proto Madhubani kind of painting is not that difficult for anybody who's learning in an art institute. But is that what it is all about? It is a different language, and if you don't understand the sort of parts of that language and how it is evolved and how it is put together and how they reinvent themselves, how Ganga Devi would use the same language to say the story of her traveling from Bihar to Delhi for her medical treatment, how inventively that can be used, then you are merely copying the superficialities. It's like, taking certain mannerisms from Ajanta and applying it and calling it Bengal school. That is the most simplistic, superficial way of looking at anything. That it is just a style. It's a merely stylistic issue. It is not. It's an issue. It's a linguistic issue. And if you don't differentiate, then this is the trouble that I often see. You have these Madhubani workshops where 100 kids come and copy Madhubani and then produce a bad Madhubani work. And if you go to the internet, it's flooded with such works. That doesn't really teach you anything. So unless you sit with the student and you make them see things that it uses the structure of making a human figure is so fundamentally different from what you are teaching a student in a classroom where you are looking at a model and studying, that needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be pointed out, and only then you can hope that some of it will percolate down, or else it is just a superficial copy of things. And it's like taking school kids to museum. They just remember, what do they remember? Whose hands they were holding and how many times madam has scolded them, not what they've seen. Try to remember the museum visits from your school. What do
So,
you remember?
so it's a cerebral practice that we have to,
Yes.
enter.
Exactly.
So that is a blend of.
Yeah, the purpose why I asked this question, because there is a constant fight between technique and concept that we face, especially between the printmaking and painting department when we were studying and in our group discussions with friends. So as we don't have any parameters, defined parameters when we are judging an artwork, so it somehow remains, the question mark remains there. So that was the main.
Constant parameter is a dangerous thing, because constant parameter takes you to academics. That is what Shanchan was talking about. Academics is not just about what we think about 19th century English tendencies as academia. Yeah, even modernist practices can be academic. What is academic? Academic is when everything is reduced to a formula, and then this is done and this is not done. Art teaching has to defy that. Otherwise, anything you do can be reduced to that kind of academic training.
Okay, thank you.
Because if there is a given parameter, because the parameter is in flux, and that you will have to deal with on a daily basis. And that is what is the exciting thing about teaching art. There is no book which you can refer to and say, oh, this practice, no, it says wrong. There isn't any such thing. So,
Thank you.
I think what is it that you mean by skill? Who decides what is a skill?
Okay, yes, because when we enter.
Because every form of skill is determined not by a singular entity. There are multiple contexts and situations that define the notion of the skill. It is also the body of the student who is adapting the skill is also defining the skill. You cannot determine the skill of that student by generating a prototype and then the skill has to be evolved from this singular idea of technique to a skill of that I personally as a practitioner would evolve into. But I also feel that every technique has a very cross-sectional idea of skill. It is not what is evident, what you see in front of your naked eyes. It is a certain sensibility that defines the notion of, okay, like we are looking at academic realism, fine. But it is an intersection of certain knowledge of light, certain knowledge of body, certain knowledge of materiality, certain knowledge of placement of things. Now, the moment you focus on these different aspects, then what you see doesn't remain a singular entity. I think that exercise is very important to open up. Even as pedagogues, even as art teachers, I mean, it's important that you unfold these different entry points into the notion of that skill. Because if we just limit it to only a kind of hand-based knowledge of, okay, I know how to hold the brush, but do you really know how to hold the brush? Because brush can be held like this, it can be held like this, it can be held like throwing something. So when we talk about a basic method of holding a brush, are we bringing the context of this multiplicity of approach of holding a brush? And then looking at skill. I think sometimes we just isolate skill in such fragmented and in a certain clinical way that the relationship of how that skill emerged, in what context it emerged, gets lost. It's not foregrounded in front of the conversation between a teacher and the student.
Simple example, extending this, you know that traditionally, watercolors, if you do it, your teacher would say, throw the black away. Okay? Why? Because in the Impressionist period, they discovered that you can do shadows very well without using the black, and the black muddies the color. So you can get very well dark tones in watercolor without using the black. But if you make that into a rock solid dictum, like 10 Commandments, then either the company which is manufacturing the watercolor is stupid to provide you with a black, they're just wasting one tube, or everything that has happened subsequent to Impressionism is to be thrown in the waste bin. Right? So you can teach this, that okay, you can very well get a dark tone without using a black. This is a context. If this is what you want, it is possible. But to say, to take this to the extent where you say, throw the black out of the window, is the problem, you know, because then you are defining it, that this is the way and this is the only way in which it can be done, and stopping the student from exploring the ways. You know, I do a lot of watercolor. I'll come to very personal thing. The way I do it is all about doing it wrong. If the grammar says you cannot apply another color where the last color is wet, I will do precisely that. And it does give me certain things which I will not achieve by following the grammar. But to get there, it took me a good 25 years. Because I could still hear those voices telling me, no, you can't go there. That is absolute blasphemy. How could you do this? And mind you, I was one of the luckier ones. Nobody actually taught me the academic manner of doing a proper, what you call, transparent watercolor. I just learned it by looking at things. And this is affecting me so badly. So somebody who has actually gone through that system would find it even more difficult. I mean, just giving an example. So that is the context that he's talking about. You know, if you talk about, you know, holding the brush in a certain way, applying colors is the correct way, then Jackson Pollock is all wrong. Throw him in the waste paper bin. Can you do that? That is what history has taught you, right? So how do you bring this together?
Sir, we have few more questions over in the audience.
Wonderful presentations, both of you. Congratulations. And just one question about the grammar part. Aren't most artists these days unfollowing grammar? And that is why they are not following grammar at all. And that is where they are coming out, they are emerging out as something different, you know? So the question of following grammar just does not arise nowadays.
If you go to the art schools, you will be surprised, because that seems the be all and end all of a lot of pedagogical models. So yes, artists are doing things which are not grammatical. All credit to them. But how much credit can go to the academia is the question.
No, I think if you define grammar as a certain way to construct an image, that goes through certain introspection and analysis within the academic context, because then you are introducing certain tools. Now, with tools, certain method pre-exists. But I have always felt that grammar is something that is always intertwined with certain kind of unlearning and certain kind of exploring it also. Because I take pigment in my hand and I put it on the surface. I take a brush and put the pigment on the surface. Now, both of these tools require certain sensibility. Now, how to define it, whether it is a fixed system that you can do it or is it open-ended, that is where I think institutions has to open up the discourse. But that these two are valid tools, that okay, using a hand and putting a color directly, but what is the historicity or the contextuality of this process? Go through it physically. That you're putting something on the wall with the hand, we don't even allow the student, that becomes a very school exercise for some children to put mark, or some project where you want to show so many people have participated, you take your hand, your mark. But we have never really explored, I think, in any academic program, you paint with your hand. I don't think there is that, but it's a very core practice that comes from so many different traditions. I mean, so this unlearning is not just about unlearning, it is also about engaging in the true sense of the process. So what we see as unlearning outside is maybe it is more about looking the other possibilities of it. But there is a grammar intended, because you cannot, if you are not conscious about the pigment and its tactile quality, you will not be able to render it. But again, that becomes a very open-ended framework. So, I mean, even in an institutional framework, that needs to grow in a certain, a very multisensory sensibility, which is not that much in, because there is hardly any conversation between disciplines within the institutional space, because that would problematize a lot of things. We are so much safe in our zones of operations and our own pride of making that we do not like the encounters of process, which I think once you go out becomes a very free space of with whom you want to engage.
Sir, we have a question from Raja Mohanty sir as well. Sir, if you can.
Yes, thank you, Sanchan and Indro. If I understand correctly, in the 1950s or so, the Bombay group of progressives who sought to engage with, let's say, the modern forms, cubists and so on, there was a certain tension between the Bombay group and the Shantiniketan or the Bengal artists. And interestingly, Baroda brought in a sort of a very fresh breath of air with, Ghulam Sheikh and KG and so on. That was then. But now 2025, is it, how would you describe any special, unique approaches that, let's say, these three very well often cited schools, Bombay, Baroda, Shantiniketan, how do you kind of, if you juxtapose them today, are they similar in some way, or are there some very interesting, unique things happening which is different in these institutions? That's something I would be curious to understand.
Well, that needs a bit of unpacking, because that is guised as one question, but it isn't. First of all, the history, if you look at, even before the Bombay Progressives, the Calcutta group came up, which defied so-called Bengal school aesthetics. And they were the first to even take their exhibition to Bombay. Bombay Progressives were still in a nascent state. And then, so within Bengal, when we see this as a monolithic block, it wasn't. There were many strands happening. Shantiniketan itself moved away from the so-called Bengal school aesthetics in many ways. If you look at Nandalal's own practice, if you look at Abanindranath's practice, these were the sort of initiators of the movement. By 1920s, they have moved away. Nandalal keeps one side of it there, 1 foot there, and 1 foot in totally different area once he moved to Shantiniketan. So Bengal school actually became more prevalent in the provincial colleges all over India, because the initiators were all were trained under Abanindranath, or initially to some extent Nandalal. But most of the students, I mean, you look at Venkatappa in South, or you look at Shamarendra Gupta in Lahore, or you see P.K. Mukherjee in Baroda, and Ashit Haldar in Lucknow, and so on and so forth. The point is that yes, Baroda came up with a third model, because Baroda at that point, when everything was seemingly going towards abstraction, brought it back to figuration and looked at a figurative tradition, which then kind of got known as the figurative narrative tradition. And they re-emphasized the fact that, there is a tradition of figuration which goes as far back as the humankind. So it is something that is worth looking at and worth drawing from sources. So not just Indian, it could be, medieval, it could be pre-Renaissance, Gothic, and pre-modern, and any traditions. So anyway, so yes, that clear-cut definition, and what was happening in Bombay is also quite interesting, because the pedagogy in JJ and what is happening with the progressives are not necessarily on the same page, right? So I think to some extent the pedagogical models got frozen, and Baroda, being the most recent one, has the advantage of also drawing from, like I was talking about, 3 different strands, 3-4 different strands. It ultimately depends on whether you are opening the pedagogical model to welcome things, or you are closing down and saying, no, we have this great predecessors, heritage, dharohar, hamare paas hai, and hum badalne wale nahi hai. If you freeze it in time. Now, once you do that, then you are in trouble. So the idea is to keep it open. Now, coming back to the question, as far as artists coming from this region, yes, you can still make out. I get applications from all these places every year, and I can almost blindly tell you that this person is likely to be from A institute, or B institute, or C institute, or D institute. I could be wrong sometimes, but by and large, 80% time I'm right. So which shows that there is a certain preponderance, a propensity to adhere to certain benchmarks that are quite institution-based. Actually, we pride ourselves in Baroda, at least the last 20 years or so, that it's very difficult to mark out that he's from Baroda, because we don't have a house style. It is not encouraged at all. You have a multiplicity of choices that people are encouraged to take. And as a result, you have them in many places and situations. But I don't want to boast about this. It is just, it so happens. It is in the life of an institute, there are these ups and downs. There are times when things are frozen. There are times when things are very open, joyously moving somewhere. So, there are I wouldn't like to, it's very difficult to comment on that. In a way, it's a very tricky question. But yes, there are certain things, like a student from Kerala, no matter which college he comes from, there are certain ways, manners in which a drawing is done that you can locate it. It's possible to locate it, at least 80-90% of the time. You may be wrong sometimes, of course. But so there are those propensities, yes. But how far they are not written in stone, they keep changing. So, yeah.
I think the whole practice of university education changed drastically post 70s, I think. Post 60s only it was emerging, but then, and it became very faculty specific, like who is where. And that created a certain kind of a movement or a certain kind of reflection in certain methods of practice. So that whole idea of a school, I think that really didn't exist in the later part of the millennium. I mean, and also in post 2000, I think the access to information and different kinds of ways. But I think there is this approach of research that is different. What to see and how do you situate yourself. There is still a difference of way of looking at things. But in today's time, the tools are becoming so accessible to everybody. I mean, that kind of a very strict language difference. But I would rather suggest that the situating the practice in different locations, that I think gets reflected quite a bit still now. That where it is coming from.
Thank you so much, sir. I know we have a lot of questions, but we have to kind of end it here. But because the plenary sessions are having a scheduled time, we have the technical sessions after this. So we can have lunch with the panelists and we can discuss the next questions over the lunch. So thank you so much, sir. And we can now go to the lunch. Volunteers, please assist our guest and the participants for the lunch. After the lunch, we have our technical sessions, which will be happening here in the seminar hall, in the moot court, in the boardroom, the VC Sirs boardroom in the ground floor, as well as the online session in the placement cell boardroom. So we'll see you in the technical sessions. Thank you so much, everybody, and we can have the questions and answers with lunch. For the volunteers and the attendee, the lunch will be at room number 117. For participants and the guests, it's in the last venue, lounge.